The French have a phrase, joie de vivre, the joy of living. Alliance Française brings that joy through French language classes, culture, and community straight to you. Classes start May 2nd, but first, try a free Zoom class the week of April 20th. No commitment, no excuses. Early bird pricing ends April 17th. Visit francedc.org and sign up today. Today on CityCast DC, DC is a big city, but did you know it's actually illegal to build anything other than a suburban-style house in most of it? According to my guest, David Alpert, that's one reason housing is so expensive in Washington. Alpert has spent years advocating for rewriting the rules. And this month, he's among the folks who are bitterly disappointed that the Bowser administration's land use map for the next couple decades is going to be basically the same as the one we've had since the 20th century. He's here to explain what happened and where things go from here. Today is Wednesday, April 15th. I'm Michael Schaefer. Here's what DC's talking about. Hey, David, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
So you are the founder of Greater Washington and led it for years, which means that you are one of the most prominent people in Washington who can be described as an urbanist. This group that, correct me if I'm wrong in my understanding, is folks whose ideas of how DC should thrive involve making it easier to build more stuff, build more housing, build more density, and build more transportation.
Yes, I think that's a big part of it. Also, just having things like walkable neighborhoods where you can go out your door and maybe get some groceries, go to good restaurants, interact with your neighbors, get to school fairly easily, all those sorts of things.
So one of the things you guys watch pretty closely is land use planning, which is, maybe not everyone's cup of tea, but is really important. And there has been big news this month about it, which is that a draft of a city's proposed land use map came out. And I think it's fair to say that people who see the world as you do were really, really, really disappointed in it.
That's correct. The land use map talks about where the district can grow, where more housing, for example, can be added. And I think there was actually fairly widespread among advocates and also elected or candidates for elected office that while everyone appreciated the work the Office of Planning had been doing to talk to people about it, it really didn't go nearly far enough to allow the housing that DC needs to add.
So explain what the map is and what it has looked like and why it is such a disappointment to you that it hasn't changed more.
Sure. Well, the way DC's zoning works, it's a little bit complicated, partly because of our whole federal-local dynamic where some things are controlled by the federal government or partly, and some things are local. DC creates a document called the Comprehensive Plan, which is a really large, at least in the past, it's been this enormous binder. I think less likely printed now, but with all of these policies and ideas to guide the city. But the core of it has been this map that shows different blocks of the city, and maybe they're colored red if they're downtown, showing the downtown style of buildings, light yellow in areas that had your detached houses, and a lot of other colors for different types of ways the land could work.
So basically it says like what you're allowed to build and where.
Yes, as in a kind of high level way. Like this is a moderate density residential area. That means row houses, for example. Then there's also zoning, which is much more specific. Like your house can be this many feet and it has to have a setback from the street of this many feet and this many feet on the side and so on and so forth. But that zoning, which is set by a different entity that's got federal appointees and local appointees, it's called the Zoning Commission. They have to make the zoning, quote, the word is not incompatible with the land use map. So the map kind of sets the tone for how the land in DC can be used, and then the zoning gives the specifics of it.
So my understanding, if I could just compress a century of American history into one question, is for years and years and years, places all over America adopted this kind of stereotypically 1950s suburb view of what should be allowed where there were certain neighborhoods that this was going to be for single family houses, and then that was going to be for row houses, and then there were going to be offices and stores here, and never the twain shall meet. And You and people like you have been advocating for many years that that change. And I, at least naively maybe, had been going forth with the sense that history was on your side. But this map actually continues to make it so that the kind of housing that a lot of Washingtonians live in, row houses and apartment buildings, are actually illegal in most of the city. Why?
That's right. As you said, historically, this was a cornerstone of a lot of American planning. People have come to recognize, I think, two or more fundamental truths. One is that in a city like DC and many of the other cities that had been places that a lot of people want to live, housing prices were just rising and rising. And we know that over the last couple of decades, a lot of people who've wanted to live in DC can't afford to. And that problem has in many ways gotten worse over at least a lot of years recently. And that's not going to change if the laws only allow a very small amount of new housing to be built, maybe just a little bit here, a little bit there, teeny bits. That's just not going to do it. In earlier generations, when maybe America was suburbanizing and building large amounts of housing in suburbs, for example, there were just a lot of homes being built. I mean, I think that was sometimes to the detriment of cities if cities weren't adding homes and all the homes were in the suburbs. But now a lot of people want to live in places like Washington, D.C., and we should make it possible for them to have the opportunity to do that and to be able to afford to at multiple different levels of income and so forth. The other thing people realized was that there was a sort of a segregational component, often intentional, behind that. If areas made it so that only the homes could be only very large ones, then that would mean that only people with a lot of money would live there. And often that would mean only people from a certain racial or ethnic background. There were also explicit segregation things that we've fortunately gotten rid of. But the effect of zoning on doing that as well is also still present.
So this map that they are in the process of remaking, when was the last time there was a wholesale change in it?
So this map was modified, but it was sort of an amendment cycle a couple of years ago. It ended up being a lengthy process. For most of the 2010s, they had just done a revision of the comprehensive plan. So a couple of years earlier before that. They were then modifying the zoning in order to match the map. Then that took so long that then they had to update the map again. And that was in the 2010s. And then that took so long that now they are supposed to do a new comprehensive plan. And one thing that was a question about whether when you're doing a whole new plan is, are they going to kind of start from scratch or, come up with a new vision? Or is the map going to be take the old one, make a few tweaks and move forward? And to many people's disappointment, mostly it was, making some tweaks and moving forward from there, which, as I was saying, is kind of not sufficient.
You mentioned how there's blocks of different colors and stuff, but you've seen these too, I'm sure. These folks who've gone out and colored the map to show like the only places where anything changed. Right. And it's very small. It is on big avenues, but it's still a very small part of it. For people who think visually, like if there's a map of DC and we're talking about places where like apartments or even row houses are not allowed, describe what's where on the map.
Sure. And people can also go to DC 2050, dc2050.dc.gov to see it. What you'll see is a red central core downtown area, then an area that's sort of mostly an orange color, which is your kind of row house areas, DuPont Logan up north to, through about Columbia Heights and Petworth. And then, over in Capitol Hill, some areas around east of the river and, like Fairlawn and historic Anacostia and a number of other areas like that. You've got sort of large areas of yellow on this map, which is kind of a lot of your detached house areas. So that's where you're in your kind of farther northeast, farthest north part of the city, most of the area west of the park, and some areas east of the river as well.
So right now, if I were to buy one of those properties and try to put up an apartment building, that would be not allowed.
That would be not allowed in most of those areas. Even in a lot of the orange areas that I was talking about, because a lot of that orange is row houses. And it depends, but oftentimes, you were mentioning this before, sometimes things that are there are illegal. There are places that are colored light orange now, which is more of the row houses. And there are, in fact, larger apartment buildings interspersed with them. But there are many areas where even that doesn't quite match the zoning or the map. Some areas it does, some it doesn't. And so if that wasn't there, you wouldn't actually be allowed to build that building, which actually is in fact there now. But also people couldn't create small apartment buildings in any of these farther out sections of the city that are yellow right now. And a lot of housing advocates have asked for just that. Many cities like Minneapolis and Austin and others have allowed that in various places. When there are some houses with much more space in between them, you can get a couple of small apartment buildings. Then you get a mix of housing sizes. It doesn't mean that overnight all of the houses change or are torn down. People live in them. They continue to do that, and that's perfectly wonderful. But maybe here and there you'll get some smaller apartment buildings. It gives some more people an opportunity to have places to live who don't have to be able to afford quite as much space, that sort of thing.
So as you said, a lot of folks you're allied with sort of expected that DC would move in that direction. And I think if you listen to the rhetoric from most of the city's elected officials, who will tell you affordability is the city's biggest problem, the cost of housing, inequities as a result of that. So why didn't that happen? Like, what are the countervailing pressures? I don't hear anyone out there saying, like, keep zoning as it is and, like suburban houses everywhere. So what are they, why did they not act in a more changey way?
I can't speak to these specific officials in this specific case, but I think that there's a couple of forces. Change is a little bit scary and intimidating to a lot of residents. And, when I was involved in debates about updating the zoning code, for example, one big discussion that we had was there was a proposal that got a lot of early support to allow some corner stores here and there. There are places like people kept saying, for example, Broad Branch Market, which is in Upper Northwest. That's, a very beloved store. And it's in an area where there actually aren't really very many other, if any, stores you can walk to where you could get something to eat or something like that, small groceries. And people said this used to be very common in older cities, right? This was the way it was. New York is bodegas on, almost every corner, right? You can just go get your mind. Right. Why don't we allow that more, right? And I thought that was a good idea. And people said, oh no, there might be some noise, or there might be rats, or maybe it would end up being more of a liquor store, or there just might be, people loitering around it or something like that. These aren't completely irrelevant concerns, but the planners thought, why don't we pass some rules to mitigate that, right? Okay, maybe the corner store has to make sure, we have a rule that it has to have a trash management system that doesn't involve just trash being open, right? Okay, so then there shouldn't be rats because it's sealed and so forth. There's a natural human, I think, instinct of saying, well, maybe my neighborhood's fine and I don't want anything to change. Often the fact is that people who, have own homes and are pretty comfortable in their neighborhoods, this issue of housing being extremely expensive and, unless their children specifically are trying to buy something in the city, which happens a lot and, they can't afford to. But, if my kids' teachers can't afford to live in the city, I think that's terrible. Does it affect me on a day-to-day basis? Maybe not, right? But is it something that I should care a lot about and want to change? Absolutely. So, you get that dynamic where often with land use issues, any impact of doing something might be felt very intensely by people who are very near that thing. The impact of doing nothing is very serious and enormous, but it's more diffuse. So people are going to be less active about it unless they're maybe have learned from reading articles or listening to awesome podcasts or social media or something like that, why this is actually a serious problem. And that's what's happened over the course of the last few decades in a lot of cities where there have been these movements, the urbanists, YIMBYs, they go by a lot of different names. Sometimes, each strain has its own tiny differences, but that they have all had people getting together and saying, I actually think this issue is serious. I mean, often some people are renting and they say, I'd like to be able to buy a home and, and maybe I should get involved in advocating for more homes so that one of them could be mine, that sort of thing.
This is Sister Nancy Downing, CEO of St. Anne's Center for Children, Youth, and Families. For over 160 years, St. Anne's has provided children, young mothers, and families across the D.C. area the emotional, educational, financial, and loving support they need to grow in health and happiness. I'd like to invite you to Hope Blossoms, our annual fundraising gala, on May 13th from 6 to 9 p.m. at the Columbia Country Club, 7900 Connecticut Avenue in Chevy Chase, Maryland. It's an evening to celebrate our families and thank everyone whose generosity has made this mission possible. As our Director of Clinical Social Work, Nina Harvey, says, at St. Anne's, we meet women where they are, affirm their dignity, and help them recognize the strength they already carry within themselves. If you'd like to attend Hope Blossoms, volunteer, or support St. Anne's in other ways, please reach out to Ellen Toops at etoups@stanns.org. We would love to see you at Hope Blossoms on May 13th from 6 to 9 p.m. at Columbia Country Club, 7900 Connecticut Avenue in Chevy Chase, Maryland. See you there.
So I have to tell you about my night at Katsumi. Walking in feels like walking into a movie. The lighting and the space and the energy, everything just feels intentional. Like somebody designed the entire thing to make sure that you feel like the main character when you're there. Katsumi on 14th Street is a modern Japanese restaurant led by Michelin-starred chef Masaki Ushino. And the food truly matches the moment. I'm talking about premium sushi that tastes like it was made just for you, a sake program with rare pours you're not going to find anywhere else, and a seasonal menu that feels like it was written specifically for this night. 2025 James Beard semifinalist Andra Johnson is running the dining room, and that means that every single detail feels accounted for from the moment you walk in. Katsumi is the kind of place you are going to want to go back to again and again, especially to bring somebody that you're trying to impress. So reserve your table now at katsumidc.com. That's KATSUMIDC.com.
Spring is here, and it is finally that rare time of year in DC when it's neither too cold nor too hellishly hot to open your windows. So don't miss out. Window Nation's The More You Buy, The More You Save sale is going on now. You could save up to 50% off all windows for your home. Window Nation's installation crews finish the job in 1 day or less, so you can enjoy the breeze with minimal disruption. Best of all, they offer a lifetime warranty on all their windows, so you can relax, knowing your home is protected far into the future. Hurry! This sale ends soon. Schedule a fast, free consultation now at windownation.com. So the bottom line is, not just in DC, but everywhere, people who get elected to city councils, people who get elected to mayor's offices, and the public employees who work for them have ample reason to be afraid that some change in a map will get them unelected.
Potentially. I mean, I think what we have seen, at least right now, is Janice Lewis George came out with a very ambitious housing plan, which I'm very excited about. Mm-hmm. Kenny McDuffie came out with
endorsed her.
And I have endorsed her. Kenny McDuffie came out with a less ambitious housing plan, but still, to his credit, also said the land use map should be more bold than it has been. Several of the other candidates that are not the current front runner or not seen as the current front runners said the same. And a number of people who are running for DC Council as well have agreed with that. Definitely, I think all or most of the candidates in, I guess not all, but most of the candidates in Ward 1, which is a denser part of the city. That's the Columbia Heights, Adams Morgan, U Street, Mount Pleasant area. But a lot of people have said, yeah, we need to do this. We need to be more bold. I hope that whoever's elected will carry that forward and really, really push for fixing this problem. Because if we have a city that people can't afford to live in, then that's going to really constrain like our economic growth, our tax base. It's going to mean that people really start to look to either Maryland or Virginia or just go to other cities. It makes it a lot less appealing for jobs to be here. And things like restaurants, right? People really love to have places that are great places to eat near them. There need to be enough people who live near those restaurants because I'm going to go to them, but I'm not going to go every day, so
right,
there needs to be other people who live there too.
Right.
And then they can go on the other days, that sort of thing.
So David, if you had your druthers, Houston has no zoning. Would you favor that? Or what do you think they should have done with this map?
Right. I don't think Houston's not a great example. I mean, there's other ways in which it's got a lot of areas that are controlled by homeowners associations and they have other rules that aren't quote zoning. But I would just like to see all of the areas of the map defined in a way that makes clear that more housing can be created in all neighborhoods. We need all of the neighborhoods in the district to sort of do their part of adding some amount of housing. So in the lowest density areas, that is allowing a number of small apartment buildings over time. In the areas near the commercial corridors, we should allow larger buildings. Now, if you look at the map, there's a lot of little blocks like, okay, there's a one-story CVS over here, and they've colored that block maybe pink to say, you know, that means like low density commercial. And we should just say for all the commercial corridors, and they've done a little bit of this in the current map, but we could go a lot farther to say in the commercial corridors, you know, you might look at it and see, oh, there's a large apartment building, then there's that one-story CVS, then there's a couple of small housing buildings, then there's some more, you know, a little mixed-use building and so forth. And just to say, you know what, a commercial corridor has a mix of all these types of buildings, and over time they could all become larger. Again, not overnight, but they can all grow. And we haven't done that enough.
So you bring up an idea like reducing the restrictions, right?
Yeah.
You could say, hey, there's a lot of parts of DC that I think most people agree are really nice. You know, like Capitol Hill is really nice. It's pretty. You walk around. It's beautiful. Broad Branch Market in Chevy Chase is really nice. You see the neighbors sitting outside having lunch, etc. It's nice. And yet it's illegal.
Right.
If you were to try to do that today. But once you get into proposing to strip away some of these restrictions, like you said, people will start thinking, well, what if someone opens one that's full of trash? Or what if you allow apartment buildings everywhere, someone's going to come to my pleasant, quiet, shady block and knock down all the houses and put up an apartment building tomorrow morning. My sense is that actually wouldn't happen, that most of the places that have, you know, single family houses would probably stay that way for reasons having nothing to do with the law, but everything to do with like people trying to make money.
To some extent, largely because, like I said, people, you know, live in those houses and they are going to keep living in those houses, and nobody is trying to get that to change, you know, right away. I think that larger buildings and smaller buildings can coexist sometimes, and that's okay. And I understand people not being used to it, but I mean, I actually live in a row house that has an 8 or 9 story apartment building right behind, and it's perfectly fine. Now, I'll say that it was already there when I bought my house, so I knew about it. It doesn't make our neighborhoods terrible. And most people's houses won't be near an 8 or 9 story apartment building. Mine is. You know, most people's houses won't be terrible, won't be affected. Their neighborhoods will be wonderful. They'll continue to be. And they'll probably have some more neighbors who can help support those restaurants and shops that people would like to see. And solving problems like people not being able to afford the city requires us to both have some change and respect what people like about the city at the same time. I think that we can be used to things the way they are, but that doesn't mean that changes are necessarily bad.
If DC had no zoning at all, spin it forward 50 years, what do you think would happen?
You know, we need to have a thriving economy, right? Before the pandemic, people wanted to build a lot of homes in a lot of places. And sadly, the Bowser administration didn't do everything possible to take advantage of the opportunities to do that. And so we missed out on a lot of things that could be generating substantial tax revenue today. We need to, you know, make sure that DC is working well, that, you know, the economy is strong and so forth. I'd love to see
assuming we have a decent economy.
I'd love to see a different person, in the White House to, you know, make that possible as well. And then assuming we have a decent economy, yeah, I mean, I think that over time, you get some smaller apartment buildings here, some larger ones maybe right on the commercial corridors there. And year after year, it won't be wholesale changes, but, you know, people's neighborhoods will evolve to be have a little bit more homes in them. And that'll be an opportunity for more people to be there, you know, have some more neighbors, have more people going to the restaurants, be able to have people open new ones, that sort of thing will continue.
So you're painting a picture of a healthier city, but not necessarily a radically different one.
That's right. I mean, I think we've taken some areas like New Navy Yard and Noma, you know, which weren't residential neighborhoods, but they were places that did have substantial change. The area around L'Enfant Plaza, where there are a lot of federal buildings that are being vacated, that's one enormous opportunity for us to create essentially new neighborhoods that have a lot of people and really help meet the district's housing goals there. But that's maybe those types of areas are half of the solution. And, you know, adding housing all throughout the city is the other half.
There's a public input period right now for this, if folks want to get involved, because this map that you all have been reacting so strongly to is a draft. So if people want to get involved and changing the draft for the final, or for that matter, in supporting the draft because that's how they see the world, what should they do?
So they can go to dc2050.dc.gov. And I think when you scroll down past it, there it says share your thoughts with OP, have thoughts about what we've proposed in the map. There are several ways to let us know what you think. And there's just an email as well as a get involved page. So people can look at that and send what they think.
David, we've known each other a long time and been talking about these issues for like 15 years. And for all of the work you've done, there is still a powerful force. I don't know if it's a majority. I don't think so. But there is still some power in Washington that militates against some of these things to make the city more walkable and add more housing and so on. And they're powerful enough to have influence over public policy. Do you think there is more sort of salesmanship or description that can be done by folks who see the world your way that might help bring some people around who have currently sort of apocalyptic views of what it might mean?
I think there's a couple of elements. One is I've seen, these issues have really moved forward a lot in the public discourse and in terms of things like candidate views since I started working on it. I think that there's a lot more awareness through all the coverage in the media and people talking about it online and all those sorts of things about the severity of the housing cost issue. There's also the sad reality that housing costs have just gotten more severe. And as they've gotten more severe, people are looking to see what can be done when all these people we know can't afford a place to live. People feel much more that we need to do something about it. I wish that this were changing, without that problem, but that's the reality of it. I think that continuing to talk about this is always something that people can do. I'm really heartened, though, at how many candidates have been, I think, endorsed policies that no mayoral candidate has endorsed before. Janice Lewis George's goal of 72,000 new housing units is double Muriel Bowser's goal, and it's multiple times I think maybe 4 times the goal, depending on how you count different things, the goal that Kenny McDuffie has set out. So we have candidates that are saying, I really wanted to build more housing. This is important enough. And I believe that that Washingtonians will vote for me, knowing that I'm really serious about addressing the housing affordability crisis and other affordability issues.
David, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.